A very special good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. Today, on the 13th April, we have a very unique guest speaker with us, Honorable Dr. David Frwaley, sir. He is a founder and Institute of Vedic Studies, professor, author, Vedacharya, and also a Padma Bhushan awardee. Today, on this auspicious day of International Conference on Vedic Psychology, he is going to enlighten us on a very unique and important topic, that is Vedic psychology and self realization beyond the mind. So, not taking too much time, now I would like to request our honorable guest to kindly proceed today's session. Sir, please.
Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. It is my great honor to be with you at an international conference on Vedic psychology with the Divya Karuna organization. Certainly, a conference on Vedic psychology is very much needed, and of course, international also helps. So, what I would like to do is give a background on psychology and then move more into the depths of what we can call Vedic psychology. Because unless we understand our terminology, our approach, then we don't understand what is behind it. You'll note that what is called psychology kind of came into the Western world in the early 20th century by Freud and Jung. But psyche is a very ancient Greek word, and that word indicates more inspiration, art, and connection with the what we would call in the West gods and goddesses and so forth, or what Jung later on called archetypes or inner essences of human life and aspiration. And over time, the psychology became adapted in the 20th century, but it had a different meaning. Its meaning was more connected to the outer mind, including the connections with the physical body, sexuality, memory, social interaction. And there was no clear model of mind and consciousness. And even today, in the Western world and science, there's a tendency to identify mind, consciousness, and brain. I remember some years ago, I was at a conference on consciousness and the brain, and it was at the Harvard Medical School. And they showed us the new wing, and there was on the wing, on the side of the building, was kind of a sculpture or, the contours of the brain. So I said to them, I know what your psychology about. It's about the brain. And so we've had that physical model. Then there's been this idea of consciousness, which is something quite vague, and then something called the unconscious, which we also don't know what it is, except it's something that does not have any fundamental awareness. And even, of course, ego was recognized and other aspects, but consciousness and mind were equated with the physical, the brain, and the social. And the goal of psychology was to normalize a person in society, social and personal reactions. And pathologies in the mind were emotional disorders, behavioral problems, conflict, and so forth, or cognitive expressive type issues and blockages. And a lot of the psychology was then crossing over and merged with, as it is today, with also what we call psychiatry, which prescribes mainly the use of drugs or chemicals for psychological disorders, whereas the other aspects of psychology were more counseling and behavioral changes, but we're still in a very physical and social model. And then there was drifting into psychology some influences from the consciousness traditions of India, China, and the Asian countries, and also recognizing of different aspects of mysticism, or in the Indian context, yoga, Vedanta, Buddhism. And in this context, there was a very different model of mind and consciousness that we will explore in some detail. Now, what is happening in the Western world today is, of course, the proliferation of the new chemical medicine, all the pharmaceutical drugs. For example, depression has almost become epidemic in many parts of the Western world, particularly for older people, but even for younger people. And then we treat it in the Western world with various antidepressants, antidepressives, that is. And then we also, with the chemical medicine, have to recognize its side effects. And it's curious that antidepressive medicines often have the side effect as to make you more depressed. And we see a proliferation of psychological problems, anxiety, depression, and an overall disturbed state of the psyche. Now, we also live in the context of the new information technology, the digital realm, and what they call the artificial intelligence. It's an interesting term because, you know, an artificial person is not a real person, maybe a robot. And artificial anything is something that's not truly real. So artificial intelligence is a computer-based intelligence that is programmed with various information and expressions from those who have developed it. And it certainly aids in communication and information, but it is not a substitute for intelligence or consciousness in the higher sense, which is also what we are going to be exploring. So what is psychology? What is the mind? What is consciousness? Now, if we look at the Bharatiya traditions, whether the Hindu, Vedic, the Buddhist, the Jain, they have various philosophies, dharmic-based philosophies, in which there is a lot of open questioning and also an inner questioning, self-inquiry, or introspection. What is the mind? What is consciousness? Who am I? What is the nature of reality? Is the mind really conscious? And can we go to a higher consciousness in which we can observe and transcend the limitations of the mind? In all systems of science, there's always the determination on what are called the means of knowledge, or pramana in Sanskrit. To know something, you need the appropriate instrument to examine it. If you want to look at distant stars, a microscope, you may get a very good one, but it's not going to help you very much because it is an inappropriate instrument. Now, in science, of course, mind is the instrument of knowledge. In fact, generally speaking, in the Western world, mind and intellect are the means of knowledge, including psychology and extending all the way to cosmology, although cosmology is also recognizing that there is also the potential of a universal consciousness, which also means a consciousness beyond the body and also beyond the mind, which are localized instruments and biological entities. Now, in all the dharmic systems, the main means of knowing reality is consciousness, and the mind is regarded as more an instrument of expression than of direct perceptions. You know, our human minds are rooted in the ego. They have all their emotional, almost instinctive reactions, desire, anger, hatred, all these emotional ups and downs and fears. And psychologists look at the subconscious as holding other memories and conditioned patterns of behavior and expression. And this moves us more towards the Vedic model. And the Vedic model tells us that consciousness is something beyond the mind. The mind is a conditioned instrument, an outer type of awareness or expression. And of course, it is closely connected to the senses, eyes, ears, etc., because these are our instruments of knowing things in the outer world. When the lawyer asks for some evidence, they want to know what people have seen in a particular circumstance. Problem is, the mind is not a detached seer. The mind is a conditioned entity by memory, education, emotion, instinct, various social motivations. In fact, we also have the idea, as Jung said, of a collective unconsciousness, but it's very simple. The ordinary human mind is a collective entity. You are a mental being or person or ego in the context of society. So your mind is this programmed or educated consciousness, we could say, but it is reflecting certain biological and sociological patterns and influences. And so what happens, the mind is conditioned as we grow up and are educated and express and interact. And so it's almost like a machine. It's an habitual mechanism. So we learn how to press other people's buttons. We learn how to get reactions out of other people. And then we have our own programmed reactions in which we respond almost unconsciously or unthinking about situations. Now, if we also look at our society, which right here is already media-based, then we are responding to media factors. In other words, we are using the mind as an instrument, but what is the means of true knowledge? So in the Dharmic traditions, they all recognize the importance of meditation, dhyana in Sanskrit, which is essentially emptying and silencing and deconditioning the mind so that it can reflect things as they are, sometimes metaphorically said as something like a mirror, whereas our ordinary conditioned mind is colored, conditioned, tinted, and shadowed by our conditioning and memory. So it's like a mirror that has been distorted or discolored. So things are seen in it, but they are also reflecting not simply the nature of the object, but also the nature of the mind as a person. Now, furthermore, meditation then is ultimately connected, we'll also discuss this a little more later, with a higher unitary consciousness or direct seeing and knowing that is not dependent upon the senses, which are outer instruments of knowing, but there is a self-illumining nature of consciousness at the core of the mind, or at essentially the condition of beyond the mind. I was at a program some years ago, and we had these Dhamma conferences bringing together the Hindu and the Buddhist spiritual leaders and spokespersons. And there was one having a discussion with Lama Semten, who was one of the main teachers for the Dalai Lama at Sarnath. And he made the interesting point that, look, all the Dharmic traditions have different philosophies. You could even say self and not self, Ishvara, not Ishvara, and so forth. But they have common values, and they also recognize that the ultimate and only ultimately reliable means of knowledge is samadhi, which is when the mind is withdrawn, silenced, let go, and our inner consciousness, our inner light is allowed to come forth. Ordinarily, we only experience that inner light of consciousness in certain states of inspiration or original thinking or dream, or of course, even in deep sleep, we go beyond the ordinary mind and its thoughts and its memories. So this idea of samadhi is the basis of the goal of the Vedic and Dharmic psychology, but it is not really understood or have a place in the modern or Western psychology. And there's a recognition in the Dharmic traditions of higher levels of mind and consciousness, and even higher lokas or realms of energy, light, thought, awareness, dream, imagination, beyond the physical. And there is a cataloging of the different experiences of the mind and a looking into how the mind operates, and a basic understanding that is very different, that the mind is only an instrument of outer knowledge, which is always questionable. Someone says they've seen something, but in a minute they're looking at something else. And so we have then this whole Dharmic science of consciousness. And I always like to define yoga as a science of consciousness. You're in the land of yoga in the Himalayas there. And I wrote a book even called the Yoga of Consciousness. So let's first of all just take a short look at yoga. And for this, I will use the Yoga Sutras. Yoga is much older than the Yoga Sutras. There are quotes about yoga and exploration of higher consciousness as the essence of Vedic knowledge, as all the way back to Rig Veda, which also speaks of this boundless awareness and a mantric language of consciousness beyond the ordinary human dialects of the mind. So how does yoga begin? Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Chitta is the yogic term for mind, but mind in the conditioned or manifest sense. Mind is what I would call a kind of embodied consciousness because it's part of a physical and biological and social being. Sri Aurobindo talked about the human being as kind of a uh, mentalized material being, or perhaps a materialized mental being, in that we do not have pure or direct awareness. We do not have unconditioned awareness. So psychology generally refers to our particular uh, mental, psychological patterning. And in that regard, we aren't a whole lot different from a computer, except that we have our biological uh, urges. We have our programming, our memory, our reactions, our emotions, and we're often acting in a way that is unaware. We are not really aware of who we are or what we are doing. Uh, and so we have in all the Indic traditions this tremendous resource of thousands of years of meditative studies and experiences. But you can't just pull the meditation out of a hat, we might say. Meditation also rests upon the appropriate lifestyle, behavior, what is called the sattvic body, sattvic prana, and also the sattvic mind. So when we are able to control or master the mind, this chitta vritti nirodha, nirodha has several meanings. One, it means taking something back to its origin. Origin of the mind is in consciousness. There's also another very interesting text, I'll just mention that briefly, the Yoga Vasishta, and it says it's very simple. We're going from chitta to chit. So there's a reflection of chitta or consciousness in the mind, but nirodha is defined in the Yoga Sutras mainly in terms of two terms, viveka and vairagya. Viveka being discernment, discrimination between the eternal and the transient, the real and the unreal, being and non being, self and not self, what gives us ananda or what gives us sorrow. So, Yoga Sutra says, yoga through the nirodha of the chitta, which also I would say means we disidentify with the mind. We witness the mind just as you can witness things externally through your senses. So what this means is when you witness something, you're not the same as it. If you see a cup on a table, you are not a cup on a table. If you can witness the mind, then you see you are not the mind. You have a consciousness beyond the mind. And there is an inner cognitive faculty of seeing, not seeing something external, but seeing directly and inwardly. And this then is what is the result of this nirodha or negation of the mind, which is also a definition of samadhi, as the seer, the drashta, the purusha, the atma, the true self, the higher self, is able to rest in its own nature. So yoga is to help us rest in the nature of the seer, which is our own seeing power. The Purusha, the cosmic person, Atman. And Atma is the key term in the Vedic psychology because Atman refers to a self-awareness beyond the body and the mind and beyond the external world and the appearances that we are witnessing in the world. These are also sometimes called Maya. In fact, a number of the yogic texts and the Vedantic texts say that mind is Maya. It is an instrument to draw in all the forces of Maya through the senses, extensions of the senses, like all of our instruments, and through the reactions, the emotions, and through the activities of the mind. There is a general recognition of certain means of knowledge or pramanas, and these are in the Yoga Sutras regarded as right knowledge, wrong knowledge, sleep, memory, imagination, the functions of the mind. And right knowledge requires either perception, although it's often defined as sensory perception. It also requires reason. Reason is often something questionable because most of us do not reason, we rationalize. And reason does not give knowledge in itself. You can say, where there's smoke, there's fire. But if there's no vision of anything, then reason cannot draw any conclusions. And then there is the means of knowledge as authentic knowledge of those who have known or realized or taught the truth. And of course, this also in the broader sense can refer to teachers or mentors or various forms. But all these ordinary means of knowledge are questionable. Intellect itself is not an instrument of direct perception in the higher sense. It is a means of gathering and correlating information through its various rational forms. And the senses, you say, okay, I've seen something with my eyes. Problem is, senses are limited. You only see what you're giving your attention to. And what you see is colored by your conditioning, your opinions, your belief, your religion, your politics, your media, your education. So it's not knowledge that is final. It is simply, as we say, information or data. And there are many great books of philosophy, even psychology, spirituality, yoga, Vedanta, Buddhism, Jainism, meditation, and so forth. But it's not just enough to hear what someone else says. You have to listen to it at a deeper level of the silent mind. That is an important part also of the Vedanta, this deeper listening or Shravana. And then even if we see things, we have to question them. We have to think about them in the sense of inquiry. And then finally, we have to meditate upon them deeply to know what they are. You know, modern medicine is making a lot of importance about what it calls evidence-based medicine. Now, this is a rather strange thing because a lot of the evidence-based medicine, of course, has to be proved by various scientific tests or arranged artificial gatherings and measuring of people. And here I just want to just first briefly identify this issue of measuring things. Because when you measure something, you have to have a system of measurement. But there are all kinds of systems of measurement, whether it's weight, height, breadth, width, distance, location. And so, what is the system of measurement that you are using to know and understand the psyche or consciousness? The seer is not an object. The seer cannot be measured. The seer cannot be seen. These are known and been stated ever since the Upanishads, or even further back more in the Vedas. So measurement is itself something questionable, because many forms of measurement can be used. You have a group of people to test certain pharmaceutical agents on, but they are chosen randomly, or they're chosen from various places and in various ways. And they're coming with their own conditioning, their own mindset, their own temperament, their own dosha, and whatever. And so certain tests are done. For example, in the United States, we have a way of testing drugs for their efficacy, or what we call evidence-based medicine. So various tests are done. Several hundred people may be gathered, and certain statistics are brought in to prove that a particular medicine does something. First problem is the placebo effect makes it so anybody who takes the medicine is likely to feel at least a little bit better. But a bigger problem has happened, is the problem in reduplication. Now they're finding that many of the tests that they did, they tried to do them again 20 years later, and they don't work. They don't have the same result. So is that lasting evidence, or is it temporary evidence? And what is evidence? Now, in the Dharmic traditions, there's also the evidence of experience. These teachings have the evidence of great masters, rishis, yogis, over thousands of years. They also have a generational, we could say, evidence. Whereas modern medicine, it doesn't work on the next generation, or the society has changed, the environment, the equipment, the jobs, the food, and so it doesn't work the same way at all. So there's also the evidence of direct awareness in oneself, understanding what is the mind, understanding what is consciousness, maintaining a self-awareness or a consciousness throughout the day, waking, dream, and deep sleep, as they discuss in the Mandukya Upanishad, or what we could also call as moment by moment awareness, witnessing your thoughts, impressions, sensations, emotions. For example, if you observe your mind, say you're angry, if you observe the anger is going to get diminished or go away, because in that witnessing state, there you have moved out of the conditioned sphere of the mind. In the Vedic tradition, this is also called the Sakshi Bhava, the attitude of the witness. Of course, in legal matters, you have to be a witness. And even in science, you have to observe. You may observe through an instrument, a telescope, a microscope. You may observe things out in nature. You may keep track of them over a period of time, but you're still observing them in the distance as an object. And this is where the Vedic psychology is very important. And it teaches us that the first principle of psychology is knowing oneself, the Atma Vidya. Because if you don't know yourself, how can you trust what you think you know through the mind, or what other people think they know through the mind? The Greeks talked about self-knowledge, but they never got beyond the intellect. And in the scientific world, by self-knowledge today, we tend to think of more of understanding brain chemistry or emotions, or again, being trapped in this outer view of the human being. You are not the face you see in a mirror, or the name that people give you, or simply the profession that you have, your nationality or religion. These are identifications. Your true identity is in self-awareness, or the Atma within, or the pure consciousness, the enlightened consciousness. And that is where Vedic psychology leads us. And that is why it questions or does not accept what is called psychology in the Western world. Not that it doesn't have its benefits at various levels. And it also brings in and questions the pharmaceutical approach or taking of drugs. I'm not saying they don't have their value, particularly in very dangerous or acute conditions, but they are not simply sufficient. We also talk about in psychology behavioral changes or attitudinal changes. These are also moving us more in a dharmic or yogic directions. And principles of right living, like the yamas and niyamas of the Yoga Sutras, and going again back to this whole idea of sattvic living, which is also going beyond ego, ahankara. Ego is identification with the body, I am the body, and identification with the mind. But it's very curious that, of course, the body is a very important part of our lives. It is our main instrument of functioning in the physical reality and the material world. But it also changes over time, eventually grows old, can get sick, eventually passes away. And we talk about things like my body or my social identity. But if you look deeper inside yourself, you discover there is an inner self, the I am that I am, or the pure self-awareness. So if somebody asks you, or someone asks me, who do I think I am? I say, well, I don't have two selves. I don't have the self that is the thinker and the self that is thought about. Who am I? So the Vedic psychology says we have to ask and answer the question of who am I in the essence of being, in the state of consciousness as the witness, which means beyond what we are witnessing, including the body and the mind. So this is the Vedantic knowledge. It's even, of course, the yogic knowledge, moving from the identification with the body and with the outer mind to a universal or boundless self-awareness like space or light, or as some of the physicists are looking for, an underlying field of consciousness beyond the mind and brain and physical world. And then we have all the spiritual, mystical traditions. We also call them adhyatmic, or relating to our inner self. We have a sense, all of us, of something of an inner being. We have an inner core of our awareness, things that are very dear to us or close to us. We have deeper emotions like devotion and bhakti. We have deeper insights than simply calculating things happening and measuring things in the outer world by what is the knower known, by what do we know the immeasurable. And in this regard, the Vedic teachings divide knowledge into two types. The lower knowledge of what I would define simply as name, form, and number. Sometimes it's said to be namarupa because it's always limited. And that is the dimension in which we are also looking at body, mind, facts and information, what is measurable, quantifiable, nameable, organizable. In other words, external things, not the inner formless and seer. And then we have the higher knowledge by which the self is known. How can you know yourself? That is the ultimate issue of psychology. And for that, we then have to ask the question, who am I? Or what is the essence of my being? And we discover that self-awareness is natural to us. You are yourself, or at least self-awareness is there. It is something given. It is without the self being there, how can you be aware of anything? If you're not there, then what are you there to know or to see or to think about? So that is where the Vedic knowledge, the yogic knowledge takes us. And it also tells us that our psychological problems are not caused by our true self. They are caused by looking outwardly and identifying ourselves outwardly through the mind and through the physical body, and then, of course, with other people, with various mental formulations, ideas, beliefs, opinions, standards of various types. So we do have a deeper self-awareness we can connect to. And it is of the nature of light and space. It's also connected to nature's intelligence. Most of us don't think nature is intelligent. We think that we're intelligent, but I would say it's the other way around. Nature is more intelligent than we are. It has many ecosystems, many living beings. And in the view of the yogis and rishis, everything is alive and aware. Prana is in everything. There is a universal prana. There is an awareness in everything we see. And so we have this higher form of self-knowledge. And here Sri Aurobindo also makes a very important point. He says, this is knowledge by identity, by becoming one with what you see. That doesn't mean when you look at a tree, you become a tree, but you feel the same being, that same universal life present in you and also present in nature. So samadhi, again, is this highest form of knowledge or knowledge by identity, when you become one with that which you see in the sense of your seeing unfolds the essence of that particular being. And that is the yogic means of moving to higher states of consciousness and also ultimately moving to a greater set of self-awareness where we transcend the body. So then we realize that we are not born and we do not die. The mind, the body, of course, goes through birth and death, but consciousness remains. The mind also has its fluctuations, but you are not your thoughts. You can observe your thoughts. You can question your thoughts. So we have this deeper seeing and self-awareness that is the Vedic psychology that takes us to the Vedic realm of higher knowledge, not only the Atma, the inner self, but Brahman, the universal, the total, the supreme, the infinite, the boundless, the eternal. That is the true consciousness, the Satchit Ananda, the being consciousness, bliss. And in the Hindu Dharma, who are these so-called gods and gods or images and idols, as the Western mind seems to want to reduce them? The cosmic forces, the Vayu, as the, Hanuman is the son of Vayu. He's connected to the cosmic prana, the cosmic Vayu, its intelligence. These devatas, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Saraswati, Lakshmi, Durga. These are cosmic factors of intelligence, consciousness, and the universal prana. So if through bhakti yoga we can bring these devatas and commune with them, then our consciousness moves then into that cosmic direction. And we move out of that simply outer physical, material, social identity and realize that we are one with everything and there are divine and sacred powers everywhere. And yet we also still have to be practical. We've also worked with psychology in the Ayurvedic sense. I have another book called Ayurveda and the mind. And of course, we have doshic factors, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, which tend to cause issues of fear, anger, attachment, psychologically, dietary issue on the psychology, mind as the essence of food, as we have in Upanishads, for example. And we also have connections between the psychology and our prana, which is not just our breath, it's our vital force, it's our connection to nature's prana, the cosmic prana. And then yoga and Ayurveda have their own recommendations. There are many special herbs that are the medya, or work upon meda intelligence, or medya rasayanas, that rejuvenate the mind. We certainly need that. We have in Ayurveda all these Brahmi, Shankapushpi, different Manduka Parni, Shatavari, Shilajit. There are all these medicines and aromas and so many things. And also in yoga, we use these things. We use the connection of prana and the senses to move to higher consciousness by deepening and calming or silencing the prana, or turning the senses within so we can connect to our inner seeing and inner hearing rather than simply just to these outer factors. So there's a whole set of therapies that goes into the Vedic psychology. And of course, they're also then connected to a lot of the yoga therapies, even something like Mauna, where we learn the control of speech and we learn to practice silence. To control the mind, you must control speech. In fact, in Shankara, he has an important text called Aparokshanubhuti. He has his 15-fold Raja Yoga, and he's added Mauna to that, because again, if you can't control the speech, you can't control the mind. So yoga then has all these other practices, self-purification, sadhana. Why aren't we in samadhi? Because we have not prepared ourselves for unitary consciousness. We're trapped in the ego and the outer mind. So we have the sadhana, the 8 limbs of yoga, for right values, right perception, purification of the body, the senses, calming the prana, turning the senses, the mind within, developing the power of attention. This is the key factor of psychology and of psychology today, because to reach the higher states of consciousness and peace of mind, you need to have a power of steady, unbroken attention that can go for hours or at least many minutes, not by looking at a screen, but by self-awareness, self-observation, or giving your attention to factors in the outer world like nature. One line I've made a few times in this regard is that we let people into our minds we would never let into our homes. And we give our attention to sensory impressions that are violent, destructive, disturbed, and so forth. But the power of mind and power of meditation is rooted in the power of attention, or the dharana shakti. If your higher mind or buddhi has no power of attention or focus, then what can it know? It can parrot, it can repeat, it can look up calculations. So what is our standard of attention or dharana shakti today? For many children and even adults, it's in seconds or even minutes. It's used to a screen, things that are very loud and noisy. We lack depth perception. We are not able to see things new in nature. We lack subtlety of vision. We easily get bored or depressed because we're overly stimulated. We're not focused. So yoga and all the Vedic things require the ekagra chitta, or the one-pointed mind, the attentive mind, which we, of course, rarely have or do not have, and we're not taught to cultivate or develop. And then, of course, dhyana and samadhi. But in yoga and Ayurveda, Vedanta, we have another great tool, which is the connection of mind with mantra. And even in the Ayurvedic psychology, we say mantra is the main tool of healing the mind. And mantra, we have to remember the doshas or factors of disease and disturbance at the level of the mind are rajas and tamas, all the anger, aggression, disturb and assertion of rajas, ego, pride, and tamas, dullness, inertia, darkness, resistance, lack of attention, dullness. We need to make the mind sattvic, which means a unitary mind. The mind you must look at things with a full unity awareness, which means full attention. And so for that, there's the whole practice of mantra yoga with the shaktis and powers of different bija mantras, the powers of different devatas, different great sayings, mahavakyas, even om, because if we can merge our mind into the mantra, then the mind becomes the mantra, which then generates a higher form of seeing. What happens to us today, our minds are merged in images, technology, entertainment. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying information isn't helpful, but only self-awareness can put it in its proper context. And the witnessing mind, the one-pointed mind, can then see what the truth is, which is often beyond information, because information is just data or appearances, whereas true awareness is self-awareness, which is a state of being. So we need more of the Vedic psychology. Again, I'm not saying Western psychology does not have a place, but it needs to develop that inner dimension. And there is, by some, the recognition of the power of meditation, the power of mantra, or how learning Sanskrit can improve brain function. We also know how different foods affect us, and of course, all the chemicals, but we must remember that we are not chemistry. There is a chemistry that's a result of what we do. We can also make our chemistry calm, balanced, sattvic, with pranayama, with meditation, power of attention, visualization, pratyahara, and moving within. So we talk about Vedic psychology in this context of self-realization beyond the mind. In fact, I recently completed a book, Yoga Beyond Body and Mind. The Indian edition will come out in not too long through Motilal Banarsidass. It also addresses the teachings of Ramana Maharshi and the Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, which is the yoga of self-inquiry, which takes us to true self-realization, which is not simply knowing our outer personality and our mental proclivities, what we like, what we don't like, but knowing that essence of consciousness at the core of our being. And if we can hold that awareness in the spiritual heart, what is called the Hridaya in the Upanishads and Vedanta, then we can there move beyond the disturbed mind, the merely outer mind. We can use the mind outwardly for expression, activity, outer knowledge, or information, but for knowing the truth of the reality, even what is the divine, what is God, you must answer that question first. Who am I? And to have a truly peaceful consciousness and shanti, we have to be able to let go of the conditionings and go beyond the karmas and sanskaras. Yogic psychology teaches us how to move into the higher sattvic realm, sattvic karmas, and ultimately beyond karma altogether. So I know I've covered a bit of ground here, and I also, of course, can continue a little bit more, but I want to leave some room for discussion. But in summary, understanding yoga psychology, which I mentioned, Vedic and Vedantic psychology. For example, you can take any work of Shankara, Advaita Vedanta, for example, Viveka Chudamani, and it's not filled with metaphysical speculation. It's giving you this idea of how to develop a sattvic mind, how to go beyond fear, how to go beyond desire, how to develop patience, observation, detachment, viveka. In other words, how to master the psychology, because unless we have done that, unless we have that inner dimension of self-awareness, we are not going to have true knowledge or true awareness. Now, of course, we have groups that are doing group sessions and meditations and meditative classes, meditation teachings. I say some psychologists are teaching meditation, but we must also go back to the true great gurus, and we have many great teachers in the traditions in these Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, etc., all the Vedanta. We had Ramana Maharshi. Even today we have all these. I was very close to Swami Dayananda of the Arsha Vidya Chinmaya Mission, Shankaracharya's Kanchi, uh, uh, and also Sringeri and so forth. There are great gurus, and we can still access their teachings. Vivekananda brought this Vedanta, this psychology, to the world, and yoga continues to spread this. And so we need to emphasize it and give it authenticity as a psychology. And also, if we do not have that power of yoga attention, tapas, swadhyaya, ishvara, pranidhana, if we don't have that bhakti, that dharana, that dhyana, that atmavidya, that self-inquiry, we're going to have psychological problems. Mind is suffering. Sorrow is the end where the mind ends up. It kind of arises from fear. It has every sort of attraction and repulsion. And so to really have the true awareness we need, outer psychology, psychiatry has its benefits. I wouldn't even say it's entirely sattvic. It can help with extreme imbalances and disorders. It can also bring people in harmony with the society. But we also have a higher dimension of our being. We're not just products of our human family. There's also the devatas. There's also nature as a whole. And ultimately, we need to learn to use the mind as a vehicle of self-realization, which is to let go of the mind, disidentify with the body and the mind, and go to the essence of consciousness. That is a higher level of psychology, and that is what we need. And in that regard, we can then even merge into the cosmic mind, the Mahatattva, universal intelligence, and recognize that the entire universe dwells within us, and consciousness dwells within the entire universe. Whatever we see is a doorway to the Paramatma, and if we can harmonize ourselves with life and nature, we will go beyond sorrow. If we go back to the core of our consciousness, we can let go of our memories, traumas, loves, hates, fear, desires. Let them go. They're gone. Go back to your essence of being, which is Satchidananda. And of course, there are many yogic and Vedantic and meditational tools for that. It's a matter of right living, right relationship, right action, right work, right use of the senses, right use of reason, and of course, developing these higher faculties of devotion, direct perception, samadhi, viveka, vairagya, and so forth. So with these words, I will conclude my statement for you, and I hope it is of some interest and inspiration for you, because we always need to be inspired. Aurobindo discusses us, and we need an aspiration in life. We need to be seeking unity with the divine, higher consciousness. Simply outer knowledge, even better science and better equipment is important, but the ultimate question of happiness, knowledge, universality is only discovered in self-inquiry and self-realization, and it's something we can all progress towards by cultivating our own self-awareness every day and developing, following our sadhana. There's so many being taught. There are many sacred places to go. There are many great teachers, many great texts, and all these tools, whether it's mantra, pranayama, the nadas, the chakras, and recognizing we have a subtle body, a causal body, 5 koshas. Vedic psychology is not just about the physical body. So remember your Vedic self. You are the self of all. Aham Brahm Asmi. The I that is in me is the I that is the universal cosmic being. So with these words, I will close. I want to thank Samyak and this Divya Karuna organization and its university connected to Sri Aurobindo. And they're doing great work. And they have introduced this topic at this international stage. More of that needs to be done, more discussion, questioning, examination. So I thank him for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be with you. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Hari Om Tat Sat.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us on a very deep insight about the Vedic psychology. As you mentioned, that it is a journey towards unlocking our true self. Evidence of experience is a very much matters in Vedic psychology, and knowledge by identity, the cosmic mind, role of mantras in Vedic psychology. You covered almost very deep and insightful ancient knowledge about Vedic psychology. I have a few related queries. Vedic psychology consists of means it is just the six schools of the Indian philosophy, or it is also including the Buddhistic, the Jainism philosophy, or the Sikhism. So, what is your opinion about the consisting nature of the Vedic psychology? How far it goes?
Well, actually, Vedic psychology goes everywhere. It is connected to the universe as a whole. Universe is a single being, a Purusha. There's a consciousness, and I like to tell people that whatever you're looking at is also looking at you, whether it's a rock, whether it is a cloud. There is a self-awareness in the universe as a whole. And Buddha, the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Sikh traditions are also Bharatiya traditions, and they carry on a lot of the same terms: karma, dhyana, then they have the temples, they have the seva, the karma yoga. And on that level, our psychology is very much connected to our behavior, and our behavior then is connected to what we are devoted to. And in the Western world, the science is good for measuring outer things, but psychology requires the appropriate inner vision. But I think they're realizing that. And what we're seeing in the world today, particularly in the West, is an epidemic of psychological issues, loss, all these attention problems, and where then of course we have all these issues, emotional issues, fear, anxiety, depression, bipolar. Mind tends to be bipolar because it's caught in dualities, up and down, right and wrong, good and bad, like and dislike, us versus them. Raga dvesha of the Yoga Sutras, the kleshas. Kleshas teach you these psychological issues. We're rooted in avidya, which is not knowing our true self. That gets us caught in dualities. Then we get caught ultimately in addictions. Abhinivesha is nothing but the addictive state of being trapped in ego and dualities. So we have the tools out of the yogic and Vedic and Ayurvedic approaches that are very practical and include our daily lifestyle and our social behavior, but bring in that whole transcendent dimension as well. Hari Om.
What is your advice to the mental health professionals, or how they can implement these Vedic techniques or Vedic psychotherapeutic techniques, for example, the Vedic counseling? So, what is the role of these Vedic psychotherapeutic techniques for present days mental health issues or the problems? So, what is your advice to mental health professionals across the globe?
Yes, that's a very important question. Mental health professionals are generally still in the field of the mind, or they identify the mind with the brain. And then, of course, they're caught up in also the social aspects, behavioral interaction with other people. And their goal is usually to give people better functioning so they can do their job better, have happier families, have more harmony in society, or to discharge certain duties to society. They're not looking at it in a more limited dimension. They're not looking at, like we are doing in the Vedic, what is the ultimate goal of human life. They're concerned with helping somebody get rid of their anger or their fear or their depression. And they're looking at it again in a physical and social model. So again, the brain chemistry is coming up, and all these new pharmaceutical medicines are coming up. Again, I'm not saying they're not helpful, but they do have side effects. They've not proved themselves generationally or in experience, and they're piecemeal. And they also interfere. If you're taking chemical medicine, it interferes with your digestion, it interferes with your brain function, your sleep. So we recommend the more natural approach. And of course, we have these three related systems. I mean, in the Ayurveda, we do address the doshas and the dietary factor. Vata dosha people, if their body weight is low and their nervous activity and too much dryness in the system, fear is coming out. And actually, fear is the root of emotions. Pitta, you're developing anger. And then of course, kapha has certain degrees of attachment. I mean, there's good and bad potentials for each of the doshas, but we have to remove rajas and tamas and have a sattvic life, which is what we have in yamas and niyamas. These are the principles of sattvic living. Take, for example, ahimsa. If you have himsa in yourself, you're the first person to suffer from it. So bringing peace into yourself is the basis of having harmony and well-being. So there's a lot of psychology there. Right use of the senses. You're not only feeding yourself with food, you're also getting your sensory impressions. I also tell people that what junk food does to the body, junk impressions do to the mind. What are the impressions? If you're seeing violence, if you're thinking about traumas and disturbances, and why are these psychologists digging up people's problems from the past? It's very simple. You just let it go. You can create what you want in the present, but if you're trapped in the past, you can't restore it or renew it. And we need to empty the mind. The empty mind heals itself. It's in that respect, it's a little bit like a computer. We have to empty the computer memory. If we just keep adding stuff to it, it gets all blocked up and confused. And then the lifestyle. What is your lifestyle? You are at a mental level what you think most about. If you're always worrying, if you're always afraid, or if you're always wanting this, or if you're thinking about you don't like this person and you don't want to do that, that becomes you. You get caught in all those emotional type disturbances. So you also need to have a mental focus, a mantra, a devotion, a tratika, a focus of the gaze to steady and to concentrate the mind. So I would ask them to learn something more about Ayurvedic medicines, Ayurvedic care of the doshas, develop understanding of the gunas. And prana, we're not chemistry. We are prana, we are living force. And certainly chemicals can influence who we are and what we do, but they don't give us prana. They may remove some toxins temporarily, or they may sedate us or stimulate us in some ways, but we need that positive life force or prana. Now, when you go out in nature, whether it's the ocean, the river, the forest, the mountains, you feel that prana. And also pranayama. Pranayama, you're developing a unified inner concentrated prana. You're breathing deeply. In fact, you're not just filling the lungs, The yogi can learn to bring the prana everywhere. In fact, you want to bring the prana from below. You can do it with the movement of the breath, the movement of the muscles. You can also, of course, the nostrils are very important, but at a certain level, you're also drawing prana in through the senses. The light, the prana of light, you're getting prana through sound. And the skin, touch is giving you a type of prana, or the Ayurvedic oil massages, and also very good for calming the mind and calming the emotions. Even asana is very good for calming the emotions because you're moving into a still place where you let go of the tension in the body, which is connected to the tension in the prana. What emotions are you holding on your breath? Are the ones you're thinking about the most? It may be fear, anxiety, or you're watching something violent. So it's very important that we look beyond simply the chemicals and understand our prana, our attention, our right use of these senses, our inner hearing, our inner seeing, and also inspire people. You are not the victim in life. You have a divine presence within you. You must awaken self-confidence in people. You must recognize the sacred in all. You must recognize that each person can go to a higher state of consciousness, but it must be cultivated. Now, I know they have their issues. Oh, your medicine doesn't have evidence. Sure, it does. The evidence, look at the great gurus. How many of these, who would you put up a picture of Ramana Maharshi and put up a picture of Freud and see where you get the most inspiration? Even you can put up Jung if you want. He actually did a better job, but still, there is that vision of self-knowledge, self-realization, and bring the divine into your life, the Devata. Not that you're placing one God against another or wanting to convert the world to your beliefs. You want to honor that divine presence everywhere. In the Vedas, we have all these Shanti mantras for bringing in peace from everywhere, from the rivers, the mountains, the clouds, everywhere, the sun, the moon. The universal peace is there. We must open up to that healing powers of nature. It's not just enough to get a good sedative. And here I want to make a very simple point. One of the main causes of depression is excess stimulation, because the more you are dependent upon a stimuli, you feel depressed when the stimuli is withdrawn, or you get bored with it. You've seen this, you've gotten the same stimulation, you've gotten drunk on this amount of alcohol, so next time you have to get drunk upon that much more, or you need a better psychedelic, or you need a more entertaining movie or something more stimulating. So because we're overstimulated, we tend to get depressed, because when we remove the stimuli, we're not active, we don't have an inner life or an inner reality. So we need to awaken to that inner prana and have our life guided. We must have a sadhana in what we're doing. Our life must be based upon a path of becoming one with the divine, or connected to the universe as a whole. Hari Om.
What is your opinion about it, that the past life karmas is also associated with the mental health disorders, or other Vedic beliefs, they also play a vital role in the our mental health disorders or the mental excellence also, as we mentioned, because Vedic psychology not only talk about from the abnormal to normal, but it also brings a normal man to the excellence, means the towards the pure consciousness. So, what is your opinion in short?
Well, karma is a very important factor in itself. We must be aware of the consequences of what we are doing. If you put your hand in the fire, you get burned. You're not being punished for the sin of putting your hand in a fire by somebody burning you. There are consequences to our actions, but they're not all immediate. So karma teaches us that, or even Ayurveda, if you take all this heavy or spicy pitta things, then they eventually have a result, but not immediately. So each one of us has a certain karmic pattern or DNA, karmic DNA that we are born with. I say you can measure it through the Jyotish. That's another matter. And we have the samskaras. What are samskaras? Are these deeper mental patterns that arise through karma, which means by repeated action. So if you do something over and over again, it becomes a pattern. And now there are these patterns that are also coming to us from past lives. There are also patterns we can connect to by way of association. That is why we say associate with the conscious being, with the guru, because then that breaks down our own particular patterns. And then we use the mantra to cultivate a higher awareness. You mentioned the Gayatri mantra. So Gayatri is to Surya Savita, who is the solar power of self-awareness and the transformative power of light. Vedas say Surya is Atma, but they don't mean that it's literally the Atma, the sun, but that there is that divine light everywhere. So the Gayatri mantra is like bringing the light of that supreme sun of Paramatma into us. So, we have all of our solar panels to give us light so we can run our electricity. We also need to connect to the solar devatas so that we have the light to run our minds and to go ask for a higher aspiration. The D or the buddhi or the higher intelligence, we need to awaken and align it with our inner self. And so there are many mantras that help change the energy of the mind. And of course, bhakti yoga. And even in the Yoga Sutras, this pratipaksha bhavana, you cultivate a higher positive emotion to remove a lower negative emotion. In other words, you change the energetic pattern. Even the mantra changed the energetic pattern of the mind. Or looking at a yantra or a murti, you're concentrating on a certain form of art, creativity, or design that can also change the patterning or the functioning of the mind. So these tools are there, and Western science should learn to embrace also the higher consciousness behind the universe as a whole. Light always has a certain consciousness with us, and also consciousness pervades space. And that's why if you empty your mind, you have more awareness. Buddhists, of course, talk about the shunya or the shunyata. If you empty these thoughts and material aspects from the mind, then the pure light of consciousness comes forth. That's why in the Vedic psychology is also a cosmology. And modern science should recognize that the universal consciousness is also a psychology. And we are, as Upanishads say, we are here to be a being in whom the universal being can become conscious in manifestation. That is the Aitareya Upanishad specifically. So we need to develop that power of inspiration and devotion and introspection. Chemicals, drugs, behavioral things, associations have their value also, but we need a little bit of a transcendent vision. Don't let the mind beat you up. Don't let the mind control you. Don't let the mind terrorize you. Let the mind be an instrument of a higher consciousness expression, bring peace and well-being to all, which starts with, of course, peace and well-being for yourself and recognize all life as sacred and learn to bring in that pranic force and light of consciousness that is everywhere. Hari Om.
And everyone should be aware about the relevance of Vedic psychology, as told by Sir, how it will help to reduce the mental pollution and the worldly problems human beings are facing nowadays, both at external and internal level. So, once again, thank you so much, Sir, for enlightening us for this on the occasion of International Conference on Vedic Psychology.
And thank you for inviting me. Thank you for this great conference. And may it give rise to a whole revolution, transformation in psychology, so we can all embrace our universal heritage as spiritual beings. Hari Om.